I have a pleasure today to introduce you to our speaker, Christian Michel, who is advisor of several non-profit organizations, president of Libertarian International, and director of the International Society for Individual Liberty. So, Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. I know on a Sunday morning after a long Saturday night, it's difficult to get out of bed, so I really appreciate that you are so numerous here. The title is How to Think About Politics Today, and there isn't a interrogation mark, there isn't an exclamation mark after the title, because I don't know whether it is a question or not. But in other words, what I would like to ask is whether there is a reason, a rationale, a moral justification for killing innocents, for stealing from your neighbors or from entire populations, for coercing innocent and mentally healthy people into changing their preferences, their behavior, their tastes, to adopt your preferences and lifestyle. Because that's what politics does. That's its purpose. That is what it is about. Who governs, who taxes, who declares wars. Where does this institution of politics, this practice of politics, where does it originate from? And I would like to trace it from the very early beginning, the early Neolithic age. At that time, there took place two transformations that changed our humanity forever. And the first transformation was the domestication of animals. What happens with taming wild animals into making them pets or assistants to the work of human beings? What the experience is that the living is malleable. Human or living animals can be made to conform to what the master wants if there is the right doses of carrot and stick, of punishment and rewards. And you have in our language today that experience of what it is, or what politics is. Führer, duce, conducator, guide de la révolution, leader, or leader maximo. And in the herd, like in societies today, on the outside, you have the bravest, the adventurous, who are exposed to predators, where natural selection is at its harshest. But they have the green grass before it is trampled by the rest of the herd. And inside the pack, you have the weakest elements of societies. Women, offspring, who are protected from threats coming up from the outside, but they get the trampled grass. And the second transformation was the transformation from the worship of a totem to the worship of an idol. A totem is simply the mythic ancestor of a tribe. It was very well described in a famous book, Triste Tropique, which has been translated, except for the title, it's known everywhere, in every language as Triste Tropique, Claude Lévi-Strauss in the 1950s, who made this famous observation: Bororos are Araras. The Bororos are a tribe. They are human beings. They are in the Amazonian jungle. But they are Araras. They are parrots. They are descendants from parrots, which means that the other tribe are not of the same species. They are alligators. They cannot get together. They cannot mix. Worshipping an idol meant that you could get anybody to come and worship that idol. It was not linked to a species. It was for anyone. Now, we obey the idol. The idol asks for certain sacrifices, but gives us something in reward, in return. If we sacrifice our desires, we can get something. For instance, if I love opera, I can go to all of you and say, you pay for an opera. That's not going to work. But if I go to the idol and I say, you know, idol, culture is really important. Culture matters to everybody. We should have an opera. It's not my desire. It's not what I want. It's what you all want. It's a common good. If I'm a French farmer, and I go and I say, wheat prices should be subsidized, milk prices should be higher, that doesn't work. I go to the idol and I say it is important for national security that there is higher prices that will maintain farmers on the land, protection of the environment and nature and all these good things. Do not have desires. Sacrifice your desires to the idol. Don't work horizontally. Go to the top, to what Putin famously calls the vertical of power. Now, what I suggest to you is that this model no longer works. We love our idol. We sacrifice income, freedom, privacy. But she no longer fulfills our desires. We discover that the state is abandoning us. And that is the crisis of our time. The word crisis is interesting, actually, because it comes from the same Greek word, kritain, that has given us critique. A crisis is a critique of what you have done and that has brought about the crisis. So when you are in a crisis, criticize yourself. Look at what brought this situation that you are in. Now, an idol had many different discourses to legitimize its power, ensure the salvation of a soul, protect the country from invasions, educate savages in distant colonies, bring democracy to the world. But now, it has only one function: redistribution. And what does it redistribute? Money. Because that's the only thing you can redistribute. All the important things in our lives, love, health, beauty, hope, the idol cannot redistribute this. The idol can only redistribute money. And therefore the state has to convince everybody that the most important thing is money. Because that is the only thing that it can give you. Not intelligence, not beauty, just money. And it can no longer do that. We have come to an end of a specific era which started here in this city back in the 1870s. There was a statesman here called Bismarck, who was the first of a sort of big politicians who took socialists seriously. He said, you know, this is not an idea of a few crackpot intellectuals, utopians. This is serious. And the way you fight socialism is that you throw money at the workers. People don't do revolutions on a full stomach. Pay them. And in 1917, after the storming of the Winter Palace, the people of money started to take socialism seriously. And the people with money went to the people with guns, governments, and said, tax us, pay them. In 1930, with millions of unemployed, people of money said, tax them, tax us, pay them. do all these things, Keynesian policies, public works, budget deficits, will pay. In 1945, the Soviets were 300 kilometers from Strasbourg. Pay, tax, we'll pay, no problem, welfare state. In the 1980s, it was quite clear that the socialists, communists would not take power in Western Europe or in America. So people with money started to complain, 75% taxation, it's a bit harsh, could we lower it a bit? And then after 1989, after the demise of the Soviet Union, people with money turned to the people with guns and said, guys, you've done a superb job. No longer problem with communism and so on. I'm taking my factory to China. And the people with guns, the government said, well, hang on there. We've made a lot of commitments. We have social security, we have pensions, we have, free education. I mean, how are we going to pay for all this? Your problem, mate, but I'm taking my factory to China. So what you have is a situation where the money is leaving and the expenses are staying. And that is not very good for governments. And that means that the jobs are no longer there because governments can't create jobs. You know who create jobs? The only people who create jobs are mothers. When they bring children into the world, that's when real new jobs are created. Because a new individual arriving in the world needs education, people to take care of him or her, clothes, shelter, things like this. The rest is simply shuffling around. And mothers everywhere in the world produce fewer babies. And it means that workers, the small guys, remain locked out of the favored sections of the economy. The sections in the economy like banking, finance, advertising, media, where you have prestige, where you have wealth, where you have power, and fun, these are no longer accessible to a lot of people. They feel exclusion, frustration, humiliation, insecurity, no future in a no-growth economy. 80% of the population feel like outsiders looking from the street the party that is going on inside. And this misery that people feel in a society that doesn't need them, despite the cost of a welfare state. We have the taxes of a war economy, but there is no war. So the natural healthy reaction is tax avoidance. Take it from another Berliner, Bertolt Brecht, who said, why should we love the country to which we pay taxes? It's a government problem, it's a social problem, how to recreate a discourse that gives legitimacy to power. Of course, I'm not the one who is going to give legitimacy to power. I don't believe in political power. But the question for governments is how to give substance to politics. And the first discourse is to say, we are all in it together. Now, don't laugh. Of course we are not all in it together. But it is an appeal to the nation. It is an appeal to solidarity through identity. It is a strategy of the reactionary parties, the anti-progress parties, National Front, UKIP, all these parties who are saying, oh, we have to stick together because we are all, and then put any nationality that you want. These politicians manipulate our natural proclivity to help people who are like us, in the same cultural or genetic boat, part of the same herd. And that's where the other people who are sort of trying to give substance to politics, the social democrats, the socialists, That's where we have a problem. Syriza, Podemos, all these people, because they fall victims to a contradiction. They argue both redistribution and internationalism. But the more people invited to the banquet, the less there will be for each of the guests. And besides this appeal to socialist nationalism or to nationalist socialism, the same boat, there is a more radical way to create obedience, and it is fear. And the first fear is fear of some outside threat, because nothing brings the errant sheep back to the flock under the crook of a shepherd than the cry of a wolf. Let power declare that we are at war, and everyone genuflects to power. The poet Randolph Bourne, you probably know this quote, which is very famous. He was writing in the trenches in 1917, "War is the health of a state." And the inimitable Mencken, Henry Louis Mencken, wrote, "The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and thus clamorous to be led to safety by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary." And there you have it. We just experienced it. Control, security, bombs can explode, enemies are everywhere. You have to sacrifice your freedom and your privacy. There is another threat, another fear, besides the threat of war, which is fear of the future. In the 19th and 20th century, the conservatives were the bourgeois, the rich, the wealthy, who feared for the existent, their privilege, their wealth, their status. They feared that that would go. And the progressives, the people who were fearing of the existent, poverty, obscurantism, oppression, the progressives were the intellectuals, were the scientists. They were the people who said, the future is better, let's go there. And they imagine, a radiant future, generally a socialist one, a classless one, and so on. The Enlightenment. Now, in a very extraordinary way, we have a reversal of the front. The left has become timorous, hesitant, intellectual scientists, they say, GM foods, that's dangerous. Technologies, we don't know where technologies are taking us. Globalization, Hans Jonas, the principle of precaution. The left is clinging to institutions of the past, state pensions, minimum wage, nationalization, without even considering how these bankrupt institutions could be reformed, could be made to work for the people that they pretend to protect, the poor. The left are the new reactionaries, and the progressives, the ones who are looking forward, who are taking us into the future, are the people with money, the venture capitalists, the hedge fund managers, the Silicon Valley, entrepreneurs, and so on. And there is a third fear, instilled by the state establishment, which is fear of the alternatives. Governments actually have given up. They understand that, the whole system is bankrupt, banking, all these sort of things. They understand that they have messed up. They say, yes, it doesn't work, but there is no alternative. What would you replace us with? Anything that you can think of would be worse than the present situation. There is no alternative. We live under the dictatorship of Tina. The ruling class admits we are in a crisis, but doesn't want to draw the consequence. They call it pragmatism, meaning we muddle through. They have no idea, no program, no project, no philosophy, no aspiration, no imagination, no dream. Why should anyone follow these shepherds. The paradigm for the world we live in is in Samuel Huntington, The Clash of Civilization, the book he wrote in 1996, which simply says, look, 2,000 years and it's more of the same. The protagonists are different. We now have 8, 9, or 10, depending on how you count them, civilizations, and they are at war, and they will be at war. And this will continue. Now, what it means is that we are stuck with politics forever. Because if you have conflicts, you have fear. If you have fear, you have armies and police. If you have that, you have governments and taxes. You have politics forever. So, a man who did believe that there is a way out was Huntington's student, Francis Fukuyama, who wrote before Huntington's book, The End of History and the Last Man. Now, he imagined the world as being a big Sweden, kind of democratic or social democracy that would be the model for the whole world. It doesn't work like this. But if you believe in a libertarian society, if you believe that the world can one day be at peace and free and reconcile with itself, then you have to be on the side of Fukuyama. Or you have to be on the side of, Karl Marx, who foresaw the end of politics, the administration of things, rather than the government of men. Now, that is the exact definition of a libertarian society. The administration of things, rather than the government of man. Because that is exactly what capitalism does. It administers. The great invention of the 20th century is not the automobile, is not airplanes, it's not antibiotics, it is management. Because you would not have had all these products if it were not for the science of management. So what capitalism does is precisely this: management, the administration of things, rather than the government of men. Why should we believe that Huntington is wrong? Because I think he ignores the difference between culture and civilization. In the English language, the words are almost interchangeable. But in French and in German, they are not exactly the same. Culture is all the things that people share, a community shares. It is a language, of course, a history, music, folklore, cooking, all these things. Civilization is this, with science and technology. And now science and technology are global. There isn't a Chinese science or a South American science. There is science. There isn't sort of technology for Russians and technology for French. There is technology. And that is what unites us. And that is what capitalism does, delivers technologies. And it's in the Communist Manifesto, again. Capitalism compels all nations, on pain of extinction, to adopt the bourgeois mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilization into their midst, i.e., to become bourgeois themselves. In one word, capitalism creates a world after its own image. And that's what we want. We want the Afghani, the Pakistanis, the Cubans, and the Greeks, and the French to be more bourgeois. So, how did history progress before capitalism, or outside, or without capitalism? The events, the changes, what caused transformation were calamities. There were wars, invasions, pandemics, violent and savage revolutions. What capitalism does is that it brings change without the accidents of nature and human follies. Capitalism loosens the dependence for change, this dependence on wars and devastations. Change in capitalism takes place in the process of production, in the offering of new and exciting services that will change lifestyles, that will provide better health, that will extend life and increase human capacity and change cultures. Because free markets incorporate innovations as the very engine of their functioning. So they do foster, naturally, constant and incremental changes. Capitalism raises the temperature of change. It quickens the tempo of society into a permanent revolution. What Trotsky wanted, but not a revolution in politics, but a peaceful one. Creative destruction, as in Schumpeter. That's what freedom is about. It's freedom to experiment. And all progress now depends on this freedom to experiment. Markets, therefore, undermine the entrenched schemes of social division, of hierarchies, of dogmas that are insulated against challenges. And this change can come from anywhere. Because free markets are acts of faith in the constructive power of ordinary men and women. Not just the imagination and inventiveness of committee of rulers, bureaucrats, experts. Everyone is invited to experiment, to discover, to try, to fail, to try again. Everyone is invited to a big life, a life transfigured by ambition, by surprise, by struggle. And free markets are about the self-affirmation of ordinary humanity. Not kings, not princes, people like you and me, here or in China or anywhere. Capitalism is a commitment to lift everyone up, to make everyone, every individual, greater. And this concept of prosperity is not just progress, a material progress, but a spiritual one. It is to make better use of our energies, to establish in the minds of ordinary men and women the idea of experience in their own power. Roberto Unger, a good analyst of capitalism, but coming from the left, has a brilliant formula in his book, What Should the Left Propose? To humanize society is to energize it. And not just one society, but energize all societies. Because that's what globalization brings, the simultaneous experience of development. Dissenting individuals and groups emerge, challenge the existent. And following Unger again, he says the role of national differences among nations is to present a form of moral specialization. Each nation, each group, human group, experiments new ways of living together and prosperity. And so you realize that this vision of globalization is not the vision of, the IMF or the elite in Davos that they offer to well-behaved masses and obedient ones, but a struggle rooted in the specificity of choices made by each country in competition to all others. New ways to explore the market. Country could experiment with workers' cooperatives, free banking, tax competition or zero tax, zero patent and IP protection, competition of legal systems, more opportunities for more people in more ways, each playing its comparative advantage. A fact that will appear as natural in the world economy as the distribution of climate in the physical world. And of course, this will happen only if we impose capitalism on capitalists. As I said earlier, we don't have capitalism today. We have a coalition of people with money and people with guns. And in this coalition, guess who loses? The poor, those who have neither. Capitalists today are sheltered from the process of natural selection. They want to be out there on the edge of the herd where the grass is greener. But they expect to be bailed out, protected, subsidized, and privileged. And that is not going to continue. And that should not continue. I wanted to conclude with a word on austerity, because there is a lot of talk about austerity. And of course austerity won't work, and we don't want it. We want prosperity, we want growth. And growth comes from the application of knowledge to the process of production. That is where you get productivity. And the purpose of science is to bring to the market knowledge and objects that were not there before. It is to routinize as much work as possible so that this routinized work can be performed by a machine that amplifies our power. So we shift our attention to what cannot be repeated and therefore is truly creative. It lifts us from the littleness of everyday life. And for vast numbers of people, ordinary people, the occasion of being lifted out of the littleness of everyday life has been war, the chance to become a hero or to appear to others as one, the prestige of a uniform, the sacrificial devotion to the idol, followed by slaughter. Whereas being bourgeois means that life is the highest value. Capitalism is the enemy of politics because capitalism has no allegiance, because capitalism is on the side of life, a full life, intense, brought to incandescence by creativity and not by sacrifice. No higher cause in capitalism for which you would sacrifice your life and that of others. No nation, religion, revolution. And it was the reason, and is still the reason, why soldiers, aristocrats, revolutionaries, and terrorists have contempt for the bourgeois, because they don't fear death, whilst the bourgeois is on the side of life, where I think we should all be. In Bertolt Brecht's play, The Life of Galileo, the young Andrea deplores, "Cursed is the land that has no hero." And Galileo corrects, "No, cursed is the land that needs heroes." They are still heroes. They are the creative men and women working for profit or in social enterprise, in NGOs, the wonderful people who design and offer us the products of their imagination and labor that make our environment more beautiful, more poetic, more practical, and more exciting. These are the true heroes of our time, the heroes I wish you will all become. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian, for a really inspiring presentation. So now I guess we still have time for a few questions. Would like to? Okay.
Hi. In your speech, you referred to this post-Adam Smith system as capitalism, consistently. But I was thinking recently that maybe this sounds too much like a corporatism in people's thoughts. So personally, I always try to call it free market. What do you think about this comparison between capitalism, calling it capitalism, versus calling it free market?
In a way, you are right, because free markets would incorporate a lot of people who exchange with consent. So it could be charities, it could be NGOs, it could be not-for-profit organizations. The market is really any exchange that takes place without coercion, without physical coercion. So friendship is part of the market in that sense. Marriage is part of the market in that sense. Contract of marriage. A charity is part of the market. But I wanted to focus on something that is more sort of criticized, which is capitalism. In other words, the for-profit side of the market. But otherwise, I don't think we diverge. Or do we? Okay.
Thank you for your talk. As you are currently president of Libertarian International, I was wondering, what is your take on the EU? What do you think that the future of the EU should be? And what do you think that nation states? What the future of nation states must be in comparison of, how do you say that, in regard to the EU, their role?
Okay, I think there are good things about the EU. One good thing is it forces people to think outside of a nation. And I think that is very important. I think the best development of the EU is the euro. In other words, to separate what was the mark of sovereignty of princes and kings for, since the 600s sort of BC, King Lydias in, Asia Minor, who started stamping coins, apparently. Suddenly, a currency that was no longer assigned to a country. It became a multinational currency. I think that's a very positive development. I think any development that will make people separate in their mind nation and state, where nation remains simply a cultural group. I'm more attached to the French language than anybody. I love French culture, but I don't need a state to make French culture exist. And ultimately, I think by separating the nation, which is something that we are very much attached to, from the state, which is a political structure that we shouldn't be attached to, if the state can no longer use the emotional attachment of a nation to exist, then we are moving towards the extinction of states. And that, I think, is the ultimate goal. If you are libertarian.
Giga T, crowdfunding for you and me.